Hey everyone, and welcome to the Product Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Garcia, and on the show today we have Kevin Goldsmith. Kevin is the CTO for DistroKid, a platform for independent musicians to distribute their music. Great having you on the show today. How's everything going?
Absolutely ecstatic to be here. It's going great. Thanks.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I gave a very brief introduction to you just now, but I'd love to kick things off and have you introduce yourself to our listeners.
Absolutely. So I've been at DistroKid a bit less than a year now. I've been a CTO though for now, 8 years. I've also been a CTO at Anaconda, CTO at Onfido, CTO at Avo. So been at a few different companies in a few different industries, but the majority of my time in my career has been in the digital media space, creative professional space. I spent a long time at Adobe, Silicon Graphics. I was in Microsoft in working in that space as well. And I was at Spotify for a few years. So DistroKid, I'm really happy to be working back in music again. I missed it after kind of a brief sojourn in fintech and legal tech and edutech and data science proper. It's kind of nice to be back in music.
That's great. You already answered my next question, which was what your career path looked like. So thank you for jumping ahead for me. You did talk a little bit about being now in the music industry. So for those unfamiliar with DistroKid and the company, can you tell me a little bit about the platform and what you guys offer as a service?
So back in the days of, well, I guess we still have vinyl, but certainly back in the days of stores selling CDs and cassettes and vinyl, stores would buy from distributors. It's like any other retail type of situation. Distributors would collect the content, the label, the discs from record labels, offer them to stores. Stores would get them from the distributors, pay the distributors, and the distributors pay the artists. Now that we've moved into the digital world, it is very much a similar thing. Instead of trying to sell your CD at Sam Goody, now you got Spotify or you got iTunes or Amazon, and those companies. If you think just the millions and millions of musicians in the world, they're not super excited to try and support all of them. And for musicians, it's really difficult because even if you get the top ones, Amazon, Apple, Spotify, that are kind of global, there's regional ones that you may not know about, or you have to set up a way to talk to. So the kind of notion of physical distribution is carried into the digital realm, and companies like DistroKid exist to work directly with musicians. We take their music, we make sure that it's good. And when I say good, I mean correct bandwidth, like the files are correct and the metadata is correct. We provide that to the streaming platforms or the digital stores. They pay us and then we pay the musicians. And I think one of the things that originally differentiated DistroKid from the other companies that existed is we don't take a cut of your royalties. We pay you exactly what we get paid, which was, at the time, everybody was taking a fairly significant cut after the iTunes store cut or that kind of thing. So we paid faster to musicians, but we also paid more.
And that's great. And I don't know too much about the process of getting music up there and distributing it. That's obviously not my background, and I'm not a musician. But I imagine historically breaking into the music industry was challenging, right? There was probably a lot of manual process of having to reach out to these distributors and whatnot. And so your platform basically democratized access to the industry, if you will, because you've provided a gateway. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. So I've been involved in music for a long time. I've run a record label since the early 90s, and where I was distributing physical discs to stores. And you had to pitch the distributor. First, you had to pitch the distributor, please take my stuff, because they actually had to physically warehouse it, right? Put a shelf somewhere. Then they had to get stores to order from them. So then you then separately would have to pitch to stores, please buy my record from this distributor. You had to go approach magazines, please review my record. I used to send out hundreds of discs to radio stations to play it, so that maybe the stores would order it from the distributors. And then meanwhile, 6 months later, you'd release a record. 6 months later, maybe I'd get a check, and I'd probably get a box of all the unsold discs, a lot of whom, would have the, that Walmart or Sam Goody or Tower Records stickers still on them, where they'd sat on a shelf for a month or something and nobody bought them, so they sent them back to the distributor. Now it's much easier. A musician we have a mobile app. You can upload a song that you've worked on from your phone. You have to enter some data like the name of the artist, the name of the song, who wrote the song, stuff like that. But you can do that within a day, because Spotify, it's not instantaneous. Spotify gets all the stuff and then it posts it. They do their own process. But within a day or two, it's live on Spotify. It's like such a completely different world. It is so much more accessible. And when we'll do it, it'll go not just to Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, plus all the regional, Deezer, like all these other places as well. You'll be available worldwide, which was impossible, back in the day. So that part is really amazing. We can't promise you like you're going to be a successful artist. That still is going to kind of be up to you. You still have to, get your music out there, work to do it, just like any other sort of creator, just like any podcaster today. Your music being available is not the same thing as you being successful, but at least the process of getting it into all these stores is handled, and we do give you tools to help you do that. But you still have to do some work in the end.
Right. So you still have to do some work, but you've at least made the entry point a little easier for people. And so you mentioned
the gatekeepers are gone now.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, maybe you are some sort of the gatekeepers now, if you will, to an extent.
The only thing we prevent is stuff that is fraud, which is a problem, right? People uploading other people's music or things like that. But yeah, aside from that, we don't judge. Yeah.
Well, that's great. And you mentioned giving access to a worldwide market. So you guys do have reach across the globe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so I bring that up, this idea of global, because one of the main topics I wanted to cover with you today, and that you have ample experience in, is this idea of scaling product to a global market. So we already know that product design already comes with challenges and things you have to come. But then when you talk about scaling a digital product, that has its own unique set of challenges, if you will.
Right.
So I have two questions for you. One, could you give us a very basic definition of what it means to scale a product for those that might not know what that means, even though it is pretty intuitive? And then secondly, I'd love to just dive into from there what you've encountered and some of the key considerations that go into scaling a product.
So, there's actually kind of two different parts to scaling. One part is scaling the product. So being available globally, just like publishing your music globally doesn't mean anyone in any other country is going to listen to it because they don't know it exists. So if you're writing in non-English language, which is a lot more popular content is there, but it's going to maybe harder to get your music heard in a country where they don't speak that language, stuff like that. So there's the kind of normal product things of, do you localize the content? Do you translate it into the local languages? Do you market it in a different way that's appropriate to that market? Do you price it not only in like local currency, but do you price it differently in different markets? Because $10 in the US is a very different, something that's a couple lattes purchase price in the US is a very different kind of situation in a different country where they have a completely different economy. So it's all those kinds of things, making sure that the product you build appeals to it, appeals to that market. When I was at Spotify, we worked on one of the countries we were working on launching. We weren't there yet. Was India. One of the interesting challenges we had is there are multiple national languages in India, and music in India is usually released. The same song will be released in like 5 different languages. Same artist, same song, but they'll release it in 5 different languages to appeal to all the different folks who speak those languages. Spotify didn't have a way to handle that, so we actually had to change the product. So the product itself was different because people in that country, that was going to be important to them. Say something like that versus, having a karaoke mode in Japan. Very, very important. It's also other people in other countries like it too, but it's not a critical product feature where it becomes a much more critical product feature in that. So it's thinking about your local audience, thinking about what's going to appeal to them. And then it's also removing impedances, stuff that's removing friction in your product. That would be location specific. Language is maybe the first one, the most obvious one, but there's a lot of other things you have to consider as well. And it's the same for us. Musicians in Mexico, they're motivated by different things than musicians in Switzerland, than musicians in Sweden. How you appeal to them, like what they're trying to do with their careers or how they're approaching things is different, and how you speak to them is going to be different, not just speaking in their local language. So that's the product side of it. The back end side, the technology side, is also kind of an important part when you talk about scaling, which is being able to support more and more and more customers. And that me as a CTO, that's certainly an important part of what I have to pay attention to as well. Is you also have to think about things like local laws, like GDPR or the European privacy laws, or CCPA, even in the US, the California privacy laws. There's different privacy laws in the UK. There's different privacy laws in India, in Russia, in China. If you're going to be available worldwide, you also have to be thinking about, both from the back end and from the front end, features that support those local laws, things like that. How do you handle more users? How do you handle more simultaneous users? If your entire dev team or your entire product team is in one region, but you're supporting a global product, you might be getting errors in the middle of the night. Is somebody actually paying? Is somebody's job to be making sure the product is running? So even though your whole company is asleep, your customers aren't, and they're having problems. Do you have customer service that's available 24/7? Because if it's only available in one time zone, you have customers that are in a time zone that's other side of the world. If you're in India from West Coast to US, it's 12.5-hour time difference. If your users are in India and they're having problems, they want to be able to chat to a customer service representative, and who's going to be there to talk to them. Especially when you have a smaller company, you have to actually consider these things.
That's great. You covered quite a bit there.
Yeah.
And I know localization is a significant factor when appealing to really diverse markets and when you enter new markets outside of the United States. And in my experience, I feel like particularly in instances where people might not have the knowledge of what it means to localize a product, they think all it means is translating from English to, say, the local language. But as you mentioned, there's a lot more that goes into it, like the price, right? So price for coffee here in America, probably a lot more than in some other countries, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
and
of course.
So since there are so many factors to consider, like that laundry list that you just gave us, how would you approach it? Say you were scaling a product for the first time, you're new to tech, and it's kind of your baby. What are some of the first basic steps you might recommend for someone who is looking to scale to, just say, even one market outside of the US? What can they do, and what should they really take into account?
One of the things I noticed kind of coming from building products in the US and then going to work in Europe, that really was different about the way companies approach their products is companies in Europe, because any market, the biggest market there is maybe 50 million people. They don't consider kind of building for one geography. They immediately start thinking about that stuff from the first minute. What I've seen a lot happen in the US is it's a huge market in the US, and you can grow and grow and grow and build a really mature product on a great growth path in the US without considering that stuff. And then when you do, it's now like a big problem because you built a US product and now you're thinking about how do I add one other country. And it's a big, it gets easier as you learn it, but that first one is really hard. And I've certainly been in companies like that where we had to think about that. If that is your situation, you start easy, like do Canada. Like you got to worry about, there's a couple languages there, but you can kind of get away with English. They have their own kind of, depending on what space your product is in, they have their own kind of requirements around governance and things like that. But at least from a time zone perspective, you're still good if you're covering like the US. I would look at kind of staying within your own geographies, maybe pick up the rest of North America, and then start thinking about maybe some of the other geographies as a way to learn with kind of learn easy. But I would also start thinking when I was at Avo, we were a legal tech product, but we were a B2C, like full C thing. And so, we started localizing in Spanish just for the US. We were US only, but we started localizing in Spanish because there's a huge percentage of the US that are Spanish speaking and a significant percentage are Spanish that don't speak English, that speak Spanish 100%. So that gave us a little bit more experience kind of targeting those markets, understanding those markets, and that helped us when we, if we were going to add something like Mexico or other kind of countries, that would kind of help us understand how to approach new markets that way by kind of looking at our own US markets and targeting separate parts of them that were really kind of new markets for us. That's another way to approach it, is to look like within your own geography and figure out, what can we learn about targeting specific parts of our own country differently before we try and do another country and deal with all of that.
That's really great advice in terms of slowly expanding from level of comfort, right? So kind of going from, say, US to Canada and the rest of North America, because it is all English speaking. And so the barrier there will probably be a lot less than going directly to, say, an Asian country.
Right. The other thing, there's one other thing I was going to say, which is that, but if you're really at the beginning of this process and you're just getting going, start thinking global, and you're building a product that you hope will someday be global. Start thinking globally from the beginning. Start thinking about, okay, you can build an English only product that is a global product. DistroKid was for a very long time English only, not but global. But it's not just the translation, it's also all the other pieces that you have to think about. How do you accept money? How do you, in our case, we have to pay money. How do you pay money out? How do you pay the taxes correctly? All this kind of thing. And there are third parties that'll help you do that, but you start with that kind of in mind so you don't lock yourself into a single geography.
That really lends itself well to my next question. When you start thinking globally, I know part of the product design process is taking user feedback and doing market research, et cetera. So say you wanted to expand anywhere. How did you approach market research in a market that you weren't familiar with? Do you work with third parties that are stationed out there? Is it just expanding the team? How does that work?
Different companies approach it different ways. Some of our competitors will go and put teams in those geographies to better understand the market. You can do that. You can do, go send a UX researcher or a product person to go and meet with folks in there. You can, with our business, musicians, we have networks that we can tap into, and we can talk to musicians, which we do all the time in those markets, and say sort of what's working for you, what's not working for you. You can do competitive research where you try and find folks who are using your competitors who are maybe ahead of you in that geography, and say, well, what is it about this that you like? And, what would you like to see from someone like us, or what's important to you? Just market research type of things. We also have the benefit, obviously, because we're in an industry that is very high profile. There's also a lot of research that just floats in the world, and a lot of websites, a lot of folks who are representing those geographies that we can talk to as well. So there's local music press in every country, right? There's that we can reach out to, and we have especially now we have a brand name that is well known in the industry that people are happy to talk to us. But I think there's I wouldn't necessarily, especially if you're earlier stage, try and building a team in all these countries really hard. It requires a significant amount of capital. It makes the operation of your company a lot more difficult. I would instead try and kind of reach out to potential customers or work with a local market research firm or something like that, where you can get some at least initial intelligence, where you can start to build something, start to gain customers, and then work with your customers in that to understand their needs. And as you grow, kind of we learn a lot more from our existing customers at this point in these new geographies. If we're trying to expand or grow in a region, we already have customers there, and they're very happy to tell us kind of what they would like us to see do more of.
Yeah, I can echo exactly what you're saying in terms of building a team out anywhere, even within your own region, is hard. So I love that approach to kind of working with what's already out there to find the insights that you need.
Yep.
And you touched on this a little bit already, but of course, with scaling comes the technical infrastructure, right? Making sure that you can handle more users joining your product and having a seamless experience. So what are some of the architectural decisions or technology choices that you have to consider as you start scaling up? And again, is that specific to the location, or I know there's so much nuance when you talk about this. So what are your thoughts there?
The only part that tends to be specific to location is really when you're talking about supporting privacy laws or things like that. So, if you're building a product for Europe that manages any sort of significant amount of personal information, there's laws about, you're supposed to store and process that data in the EU. So that is a technical, it's a legal requirement, but it's also a technical requirement. It's similar with now other countries as well. And there's more privacy laws that are being created all the time. So you also have to be watching that. They'll expect you to. They'll fine you if you don't. So it's serious. So that's the sort of major technical kind of location-based things you have to worry about. Depending, like when I was doing kind of B2B fintech stuff, we would also do that, like even if it wasn't a law, because our customers who were banks and stuff like that weren't very excited about having their data being processed in other countries as well. So that's also sort of a business reason why you may want to do something location-based as well. But aside from that, you pay attention to your systems. You look and see how you're scaling. A lot of companies start with because it's easy, they'll start with sort of big servers and that kind of thing. And they'll think, well, we're going to scale, so we need to have like a highly available, multi-site, like build very, very sophisticated, like Google style software architectures that really aren't what they need. And they waste a lot of time and money kind of building that stuff before they need it. I've made that mistake, in a company before, trying to we have to worry about all the scale, and I don't want to have to, as we're growing, try and have to retrofit everything because we're not scaling well anymore, and just instead wasted a lot of time building an overly sophisticated architecture we frankly didn't need at that point. What I've found oftentimes is the things that you think won't scale well in your software architecture scale fine, and the things you thought would be fine scale very poorly. So it's really just an approach of paying attention, seeing how things are working, and then not waiting till things are on fire to start kind of evolving them, and not being afraid to evolve your architecture as the company grows. But keeping it simple, keeping it pragmatic, servicing your current users, maybe thinking, oh, okay, maybe the next 6 months or the next year, what are we going to need, and not like 5 or 10 years from now. I've really come around to that as a way of thinking, just because, like I said, it's really easy to get it wrong. Like, oh, we need to switch to this database architecture, even though it's going to be a lot more challenging for us to maintain because we're going to need it as the site grows, and really that's not what happens. The database is just, you waste a lot of time and energy supporting something that's way beyond what you need, and the thing that's really breaking down is web servers or something like that.
That's great. And so that was the back end, and I'm going to pivot to the front end. Mm-hmm. I know part of scaling, and when we get into localization, when you start, let's say, shifting things based off of markets and cultural experiences and expectations, how do you ensure a seamless experience across different regions when you are making these, I guess, very nuanced changes based on location? There's a lot to manage there, and I know from my experience, it can be overwhelming as people start to get larger in scale and support more clients.
You made me think of something actually I didn't bring up, which is critical, but it's the data and having insight into what's going on in your own platform. I think that's something, you have tools, and plenty of people are very interested in selling you sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of data analytics platform for your company. And that's a great way to start. But I think if you're really serious about building a global type of product, having an in-house analytics capability, an analyst if you're small, an analyst team if you're bigger, who can actually interpret the data, because it can be very subtle country to country why this country is adopting this feature or this platform and why this country isn't. I think and they can actually go through and either figure out what you need to instrument to answer the question, or they can answer the question in a way that you looking at Google Analytics or you looking at Segment or whatever you won't be able to figure out, right? And the combination of the things along with whatever else is going on regionally at the time, right? Oh, well, we had this big uptick in Madagascar. What just happened? We aren't spending any more marketing money. Oh, this music festival just happened in Madagascar, and okay, well, somebody actually has to go and figure that kind of stuff out. Or just there's the things we all kind of take for granted. Mobile in certain countries, 100% mobile traffic versus desktop traffic versus apps. Like, when do you do your app? When do you do mobile web? Like these kinds of product decisions, and this is all kind of stuff that you can understand or project better with good data.
That is great. I've had a lot. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and the other part is also understanding certain countries have better. The Nordics have ridiculously good, broadband and high broadband Wi-Fi or broadband cellular. Parts of the U.S. have crummy broadband. Parts of other countries have crummy broadband, but are 100% mobile. And whether you use mobile Wi-Fi versus mobile cellular, pricing, like, mobile data is very expensive in this country, but Wi-Fi is free. So having these understandings when you're building, let's say, a media product that requires lots of bandwidth, this was the kind of stuff that we had to think about all the time at Spotify. Understand the local things and test them and test the product in these kind of different scenarios as well to understand how it would perform.
Sounds like you had to juggle a lot of balls at the same time just to get things off the ground.
That's building a global product.
And I say that, and I feel like as much as you can plan, I'm sure not everything goes according to what you've planned, right? So,
of course,
when we speak about lessons you've learned from failure, obviously, I think failures can often teach us some of the most valuable lessons when scaling. Yeah. I'm curious to know, in your experience, whether at DistroKid or just across your entire career path, have there been setbacks you encountered in your career that really shaped your approach to problem solving and scaling and innovation? Anything key stand out in your mind?
So I give conference talks, and there's a conference talk I give on failure and resilience to failure and how to fail well, how to fail successfully. And I talk about what is probably the greatest failure of my career in this talk, which was actually something that happened at Spotify. It was something some people may remember, but almost no one will. It's a product Spotify was going to release called Spotify Now. It wasn't a product; it was a set of features. It was right before Apple Music was about to launch, and we were going to show Apple that we were the true innovators in streaming music. And so we had a bunch of features that were all things that we'd been working on. Spotify had a really excellent kind of test and learn, not only infrastructure, but mentality and culture around testing new features with customers in the real world before we rolled them out to large groups of folks. And so because we were worried about the press finding out about this, we didn't want to test any of these features because we didn't want the press to find out about them. Up until right towards the end, where we did test all of them with a cohort of users in New Zealand, we got really positive results back. We had our big event, we launched it, and then turned out very negative. Negative data came back. Luckily, we'd only rolled it out to a very small percentage of users because that's how we did everything. So we wanted to verify even our pre-release data. And that was lucky because if we'd rolled it out to a lot of users, it would have been a colossal failure, like commercial colossal failure instead of just a personal career failure. But we then had to go through, because we'd done a whole bunch of things all at once, we had to go through and figure out what we'd done wrong. And also that included what in our A/B testing system was broken, which was one of the issues. But because we had the ability to go through and test and support from the organization, let's figure this out rather than say, you all screwed up, you're all in trouble. It was like, wow, we did the right thing, got something we didn't expect, let's figure it all out. And because of that, we were able to identify the things that weren't working, keep the things that were, and eventually got the big win. A lot of the stuff that is still driving Spotify is very much like stuff that started at this release, including podcasts was one of the things that was part of Spotify Now. There were a lot of the algorithmic playlists were part of Spotify Now. These have been incredibly successful for the company. But rather than say, well, there was a lot of stuff in there that wasn't so good, but rather than either throw it all out, this is a huge mistake, and bury it, we took the time, and it took a long time to go through and examine each of these things, to test them independently, to figure out, okay, well, we tried to do something big, it didn't quite work out, but let's figure out what is working. And so that's been a lot of, that definitely influenced how I do things. One, just understanding that culture of, let's try stuff. Let's not give it to all customers at once. Let's try this. Let's do progressive rollout. Let's do A/B testing, which I'd already learned. But then when you fail, how you handle that failure and how you learn from it, absolutely has influenced me ever since.
I love hearing stories like that, because I feel like we've all had moments in our career probably that stick out very distinctly of that big, oh boy, that could have gone bad. And as you said, it is really about how you pivot and learn from it and how you react, right? Mm-hmm. It could have been a larger failure, but you were able to take life lessons from that you now probably apply to your process and the way you run things now.
I'll say, one of the things that attracted me to DistroKid behind just coming back to music was that this was a company that actually very much understands that as well. And it is hard. I mean, even as a C-level person, it's kind of hard sometimes to kind of bring that culture in. You can, it's a lot of work, but to kind of join a company that already has it, so awesome.
I spoke with someone recently as well who mentioned a similar thing of creating a culture of failure is actually, I believe, how they had phrased it. And I said, can you explain what that means? Because that doesn't sound like a positive KPI, right? If we're talking about business. And they were saying that it's just this idea that it's okay to mess up, and it's just about how you react to it, and that you are prepared to react fast if something doesn't go well. And you're able to learn a lot more by making smaller mistakes versus trying to do, I don't know, big things and waiting till the end to like release things. As you mentioned, you waited to the end to test something. So
Yeah.
It's just an interesting concept in terms of setting up the right cultures to scale, innovate, do whatever you're doing at a company.
A culture that can't handle failure well is a culture that's not going to innovate. You're going to not build it. You can't innovate without getting something wrong, right? You know, how many times did it take Edison to find the right filament for the light bulb, right? I think Kevin Smith, the film director, I'm going to maybe screw up the quote, but he has a great quote I love, which is like, failure is success practice, right? You
I love
can't,
that.
yeah, you can't do anything. If you can do anything new perfectly the right first time, is probably not very hard. It's probably not anything special. You have to screw it up a few times before you can do anything really good.
I love that. Innovating without getting something wrong. I think that's a really great line that's going to stick with me. Which brings me to kind of my next thought here in terms of future thinking and forward thinking. A big conversation going on now is just like emerging technologies, specifically, the AIs, machine learning, chat GPT, all of that. Are these affecting the work that you're doing on your end, and how are they affecting what you're doing?
They're affecting us in significant ways. There's a whole bunch of stuff on multiple sides, right? So it's a huge thing going on in the music industry right now because of there was a tracks like the Ghostwriter track that used Drake's voice and The Weeknd's voice, right, and things like that, and artists are now licensing their voices so you can use it in your own tracks and things like that. AI has been part of music making actually for a long time. That's accelerating. So both in the ease and quality that individuals can make, like we're all about helping people realize their creative vision and share that with the world. And a lot of what holds people back is the feeling like I don't know how to be a producer. Or I like music, but I can't play piano, or these kinds of things. I have songs in my head, but I can't make them. All these kind of technologies are happening, which is revolutionizing. Is that a word? Whatever. Changing how music is made and making it, democratizing it a little bit, which is fascinating for us as folks who exist to help people, share their music. But also on the other side, as I mentioned, like we actually have a significant part of what we do is manage fraud, because people will try and steal other people's music and try and capitalize on it, or other things around this. Anytime you collect money and pay it to people, fraud's an important part of business. And I do spend time on that as well. AI is not only helping make that more possible, but AI is also helping us catch that stuff as well. So we actually do have our own machine learning team, our own data science team work on fraud, but also work on features and things like that. Like any SaaS company, we have our own data science team helping us do what we do. It's going to continue. The generative stuff, we've been shipping generative AI features in the product actually for quite a while. We have tools that improve your mixes, master your mixes for you. We have tools that will. One of the things that helps you on streaming platforms is having your lyrics there. But a lot of artists don't have their lyrics written down or don't feel like writing down their lyrics, so we can extract the stem, convert it to text. We do use AI to clean it up and to align it so that you get your nice synced lyrics in Spotify or Apple, stuff like that. So we use AI a lot, and we'll just continue to leverage those tools. And there's a lot still being worked out. I don't know what's going to happen to music over the next couple of years, but it's a real kind of sea change in the entire music industry. So, I'm really excited to just be part of it and see how things evolve.
That's great. The narrative that you see, I think, in the media is that a lot of people are saying AI is going to replace the workforce. And the more conversations that I have with other innovators and people in tech is that we're actually hacking, if you will, AI to do some of the grunt work, if you will, for us, while we can optimize and be more creative in other areas of technology. So it's really interesting, particularly in music, where I don't necessarily have that background, to hear how you guys are applying AI to the specific problems and challenges that your employees or end users are seeing. So I'm excited to see where AI goes and how it gets used across all different industries and mediums.
It used to be that, if you wanted to use AI in your product, because I've led data science teams or been responsible for data science teams for many years now, like from Spotify on, and or even before I was at Spotify. It used to be you wanted to have a data feature in your product. Oh, you got to go hire a PhD person, and they need a support team around them, and it's very expensive, and it's going to take a long time, and you have to build everything yourself. And now these new tools have just made it so much more accessible to do a lot of things that used to take a lot of time and a lot of money to do. And what's interesting now is, between that and some of the AI tools that are available through the cloud providers, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, whatever, you can do. It's incomprehensible how any product that could use AI isn't using AI at this point. Ignoring even the ChatGPT and that kind of stuff, it is so much more accessible now that you don't need a really sophisticated, expensive team to do it. You can just do it, and products that haven't quite realized that are going to really feel the pain as these much smaller products like outmaneuver them, out innovate them.
I agree. I know it is a bit of a buzzword, AI, but the applications of it are really interesting, and I think the people that aren't catching on to it and at least exploring it might be at a disadvantage in a few years. So I agree there. Kevin, I know we cover a lot of stuff in these conversations, and we are reaching an end here. We like to wrap up these episodes with what we call a Majestyk Byte, or the one key takeaway you'd like our audience to walk away with. So could you share with us what your Majestyk Byte would be for today?
It's funny because we didn't talk, we talked a little bit about career, but we didn't talk as much about my personal career. I think the one thing I've learned over kind of, now over 30 years working in technology has been that I always have to be curious. I always have to be learning. I can never assume that what I know is sufficient for everything else, right? So when I started, AI existed. It was a very, very different world. I studied Lisp in college and stuff. I did grammar engineering with Prolog to like diagram sentences, like where we are. And then I didn't for a long time. I was doing very different things. As AI started to get real or just more common, I had to go and learn it. I had to go and try and understand it. Not that I am like a data scientist or an expert, but I had to know it enough that I could think of how could we use it to solve this problem? How could we use it here? Same thing with, new architectures, new programming languages, new product development. Lean didn't exist. Well, Lean maybe at Toyota did, but kind of Lean and startup didn't exist when I started working. Agile didn't exist. I had to notice these things and then decide to learn them so that they could become tools I could use. So that, I think, is the one thing, is you can never stop being curious. You can never stop learning, and you can't assume that what you know works anymore.
I hear that, especially as a product designer. When we do mobile apps, then you have new phones every year, and as you feel like you've gotten a handle on one OS or one whatever it might be, something's new out, and your knowledge is already starting to fade into the background. So it is definitely a struggle I'm familiar with, the constant need to stay up to date and learn. So that is a great bite to leave us with. Kevin, Oh, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, like, speaking of building global products, understanding that how tie works and how words get tied together depending on the order they're in, or understanding right to left versus top to bottom type of languages, and how, all that kind of stuff. Like if you're building UIs or you're building applications, you think, oh, German words are long. Well, that's a start, but that's like that's like level one. Like, seriously.
Yeah, a lot to consider. That's funny. But where can people go to find out more about you or your company online?
So for the company, DistroKid.com, easy peasy. For me, KevinGoldsmith.com, also fairly easy. So that has links to KevinGoldsmith.com has links to my writing, my upcoming talks that I'm giving. It links to Twitter and Threads and Mastodon and Blue Sky and whatever else will exist between now and when this comes out. And all that kind of stuff for DistroKid is also available from distrokid.com.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to link to those in the episode. But Kevin, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It was great talking to you.
Great time
and hopefully we can connect again in the future.
Thanks so much. This is a great conversation.
Take care.